Hello and welcome back to another episode of Critical Reactions with your host Bryan. We're going to wrap up this week with an album review where I check out an entire album track by track, exploring what each song does in isolation and its placement within the larger work. Today we're going to be looking at the group Carissa's Wierd. Interestingly stated as if Carissa owns this Wierd chip, it's an apostrophe S. We're looking at the album Songs About Leaving, which sits right in the middle of their discography. Between the years of 2000 and 2004, they released one album a year. This is the 2002 album number 3 out of 5. There is a sixth album, though. It came out in 2011 after a lengthy gap of 7 years before their 2004 I Before E. So, technically this doesn't sit right in the middle of their entire discography, but it does sit in the middle of their original batch of albums. With that said, let's dive into Songs About Leaving from 2002, kicking it off with the track You Should Be Hated Here. I like the vocal placement already. Really raw drum sounds. That was an interesting sound there at the end. Interesting first track. I talk a lot, especially in these album reviews, about the importance of a first track. There really are two important songs for a band. One is your singles, it's what you release out into the public to basically act as marketing, and the other is going to be the first track on an album. It's going to be what draws somebody who listened to a single and decided to check out an album. It's going to be the first impression of what you're doing specifically at this point in time. It needs to hook somebody in. Now, we've listened to a Carissa's Wierd track before. I think on a live stream. I don't think we've ever done a full reaction to one. And the name has been stuck in my head. I enjoyed them. I don't remember why. I don't remember what they sound like. They are in my list of bands to further check out on my own time. I was not expecting this. This is, well, it's kind of emo, which I think is why I put them in my list of stuff to check out. There's definitely some combinations of chords and notes in the melody that feel Midwest emo to me. But it's presented in a way that's a little different. It feels like a mix of indiecore and strings. I'm not quite sure where the strings fit in yet. It felt like the string writing wanted to evolve in a different direction harmonically than the song did, and it felt like it was constantly being reined in. It wanted to go towards something that, I don't know, is a bit more expressive. I'd like to see the string part, if that is something that's recurrent throughout the album and not a sound just for this opening track, I'd like to see it expanded upon and able to go out in a direction that isn't so constrained within this rock sound. Now, the instrumentation, though, is primarily there to craft atmosphere. We get a lot of chords, we have some more melodic lines, but nothing really takes lead melody away from the vocals. They're the main instrument in this track. And they take up a majority of the mix as well. They're not only just the only instruments that give lead lines, but they're also the instrument that takes up the most amount of space and have the most amount of writing throughout the entire song. In fact, for the first minute and a half or so, it's just the vocals and some light chord work underneath it. The vocals, they carry a lot of weight as far as pushing the song forward and allowing it to be interesting and doing something other than creating a vibe. What I really love about these vocals is that they take that weight and they utilize it to push the song forward in ways that I typically wouldn't expect. On some levels, the vocals kind of are typical, they're expected, they don't do anything different. We have vocal melodies that, at least to me, as I mentioned, they feel like they derive themselves from emo writing, feel very natural and expected for me in a lot of ways. When I hear a first couple of notes, I kind of know where the melody's going after that. The harmonies utilized between the two vocals also are expected gaps in pitch. What I didn't expect, though, was the placement of the vocals. I found this to be interesting and a fantastic choice. We typically have the male vocals center and the female vocals out to the side in a way that makes them feel distant from the center vocals. Musically, we're trying to stack these notes up to create the dyad. We want them to be heard as a singular sound, but spatially, they couldn't feel further apart. I find that to be a really interesting dichotomy. I do end up hearing the vocal lines as a unified idea most of this track, but it's through great effort. By default, I feel like the song wants me to feel the distance between them. I also find it interesting that, at least for the center vocal, it sounds single-tracked. That might not be true. It might be that the production on it just makes it very effortless, but I don't get the feeling that there's two distinct vocal lines there. It's lacking the extra width that I would expect from that. However, the vocals pushed out to the sides have different ending points and starting points in different volumes and inflections. I'd wager to say that that was recorded twice with one take put on either side. I'm not quite sure the purpose of all of this. Maybe it doesn't have any compositional meaning. Maybe it's strictly a production one. When they, did one track and then just pushed it out to the sides, maybe that felt unnatural for whatever reason, so they did a double track of it and used one track on each side. but it is something I noticed, and I felt it was really interesting. Maybe it's just also that the separation really allows me to hear the distinction between the different takes. I don't know. But the entire way that the vocals are placed here is unique and unexpected. It presents this song in a way that makes it stand out from songs that I've heard similar to it. Male, female vocals harmonizing over top chords. Like, this is music writing 101. Have some harmonized leads over a very basic foundation. You can't make a song much simpler than this. This follows that blueprint to the T, and yet they still found a way to put their own stamp on it. The other way that they sort of stood out a little bit for me is counterpoint. The second group of lines, I don't know if I could call it a second verse, maybe the back half of the first verse, saw the two vocals separate in what they were singing, both musically, the melody that they're singing, and the words that they're singing lyrically. They were both very convoluted, always moving. It wasn't that one person was focusing on faster moving ideas and the other one was holding out notes. That's something we see often. It creates a separation between the two melody lines that allows for some clarity in the counterpoint. No, here, just both of them were sort of... We'll touch on that in a second. We'll leave that for a surprise. What were they doing, Bryan? No, they were both faster. They both had faster lines around the same-ish pitches. It's not like they were very distinct in that. It created a very cluttered moment, which I'm going to assume was purposeful. When we get to the lyrics, it's probably going to make sense that it was difficult to make out what they were saying because there was just so much overlap in how they were saying what they were saying. So I found that to be interesting. Was there anything else that stood out to me on this? I mean, it's a short track, basically does one thing with a variation on the back half. Production. Let's touch on this real quick, because we've already talked about the vocal production. I think the guitar sounds fine in here. The strings sound fine. They have a nice warmth to them. And so everything kind of being okay, with the vocals being... yeah, I guess okay. I could have went with some stronger vocal production, but I think this was fine. It was close to raw without being raw. It gives it the indie rock vibe without really going for that, well, like what the microphones do with their vocals. Pretty much, I mean, right on the cusp of no processing at all in the vocal work in that album. This is just a hair bit above that. You still get that vibe without all of the raw grittiness that comes with it. It works. So yeah, everything is kind of okay here. It's a bit more underproduced than I would have liked, but it presents a specific vibe for the song that works for what they're doing. The one thing that feels way too underproduced, though, for me, is that snare hit. It just sounds strange in this song. I hope it's not something we hear consistently through the album. Maybe I'll get used to it, though, which is pretty typical. You know, I'll talk about production after the first track, and by the third or fourth, I'll be like, yeah, you know, it's growing on me. But it stood out so... and I think the other thing, too, is it doesn't just stand out, but we're with it for such a long, short amount of time. Does that make sense? It feels like I hear that snare so often that it kind of grates on me, but we also only heard it for like 40 seconds of the song, so I didn't really have time to acclimate to it either. It was just long enough for me to recognize it, but not long enough for me to get used to it. And so overall, I think the general production of this track is good. It presents a specific vibe that they're obviously going for. It feels very natural and sincere without moving into that range of underproduction. Again, like we looked at with the microphones, not throwing any shade at them. That album also did what it did in order to create a specific vibe. But the production was something that never quite clicked with me for that album. And here it's something that, again, I think it's going to be a little bit of a hurdle. So, anything else for this? I don't think so. Let me hit some lyrics and then a little bit of information about the project I think I'm also going to talk about. And then we'll push forward. Alright, quite a few things to note before we get into the lyrics. This is actually not in the middle of their release discography It's their final studio album. After this came Scrapbook, which was a compilation album? Yes, compilation album. And after that was I Before E, which I had talked about, which is just a live album with 3 extra studio tracks on it. The 2011 Tucson is a single containing only 2 tracks. I can't tell you because apparently it doesn't want to load the page for that. I remember there's only 2 tracks in it though, and I assume one of them is called Tucson, the single. So yes, this is their final album. And when I say their, I'm talking about Matt Brook and Jen Ghetto, who later became Jen Champion. When they moved from Tucson to Seattle, they added the pianist Jeff Hellis and then a revolving door of percussionists and violinists. I tried to find a personnel list for this. Oh wait, I got one. Okay, Genius comes in on the last second for a clutch win. We got Sarah Standard on violin for this track, at least specifically the one we just listened to. I'm going to try to keep up with that on each track and see if maybe she was just the one for the entire album or not. Drums was Ben Bridwell. So, that's what's on this track. I called it The Strings. Just a violin. Maybe there are a couple tracks to it, but I'll try to keep that going forward. We have 2 vocalists, violin, piano, and drums. And that, an electric guitar. So Jen, who's one of the vocalists, also does guitar work. Oh, and Matt does the acoustic guitars. Alright, so now I have an idea of the types of instruments and the width that the band employs, especially, I mean, that's good going forward given how this last track we listened to was rather sparse on instrumentation, so I wasn't quite sure everything that we were getting in store for. The last thing I want to note here is a description of this album. It says it's a 2002 album by slowcore chamber pop band Carissa's Wierd. It's very sad, beautiful, and an understated album dealing with heavy emotional themes. Yeah, looking at some of the comments that were provided by critics when this was released, that seemed to be an accurate representation of this album, something that has heavy emotional themes but is beautiful within its own right. With that said, this track specifically, I don't know I would have picked up on what it is about without some annotation. It seemed to be, I don't know, definitely a bit downtrodden. A lot of negativity in it, but I wasn't quite sure that I packed it all up into one idea until I read some of the annotations, and it is about somebody dealing with depression. The opening says they're all surrounded, and we're both hoping. Failing slowly, attempting one thing, to stand up with dignity, to walk away. And how each of these sentences sort of connect with the others, but are all segmented. We have an idea, and then another idea, and then another idea. It's kind of how a lot of the lyrics in this track feel to me. And that's one of the reasons why I had such a tough time piecing it all together. It isn't told linearly. There's gaps between ideas in a way that makes it into a puzzle. You have to piece everything together. What's the through line here? Why did we jump from this idea to the next? Why? What would tie them together? And I'll be honest, I didn't always have that answer. But the idea right here, failing slowly, attempting just to stand up with dignity and walk away. It mentions how even something so small as getting up off the ground and that becoming something you have to attempt to do, and while you're doing it, you're slowly failing at it, is an accurate representation of depression and the difficulty to do even simple tasks. Next up, we have the stanza where we have both vocalists doing 2 different things, and there are so many words here. One vocalist says, due to the time it took to prove it all, the new lines around my eyes, you'll know the scars upon my head were only meant to spell apologies. The other vocalist says, never thought I could do anything right, but I don't mean to say that you were wrong. Which brings in a little bit of a relationship element to this. Me being friends with you or being in a relationship with you was one of the best things that I've done, despite the fact that I personally think I make a lot of mistakes. And I think that first sentence, never thought I could do anything right, leans a lot into this depressive perspective. It is somebody who does not have a very high self-esteem, does not have a very good picture of who they are as a person. Even in their own mind, they look down upon themselves. And of course, the other vocalist kind of brings in a little bit of, I don't know if it's necessarily a self-harm angle, but they do say the scars upon my head were only meant to spell apologies. The pain I inflicted upon myself are supposed to be a way that I said I'm sorry. I don't think it is atypical for people who are depressed to be hard on themselves mentally and even sometimes physically. It doesn't necessarily need to show up as traditional concepts of self-harm, but there is still harm being done to the self. Later on, this part I think is interesting. It says, everything that no one knows, you should be hated here by now. That was the prettiest lie I told tonight. I thought all of this was interconnected. The annotation states it isn't, and this is one of those places where I found that the way that the lyrics were presented were difficult for me to understand. Me reading it all together found a dissonance between, I couldn't figure out what it was all trying to say. And I thought it was you speaking to somebody else, shouldn't be here tonight. You should be hated here. That's the prettiest lie I told tonight. About this other person, but it's actually them speaking about themselves, at least from the annotator's perspective, and that this is another case of them putting themselves down. And everything that no one knows. So if you only knew what was going on inside me, I would be the most hated person here now. And the fact that you don't know what's going on inside, that I put up this front, that I wear this mask, that's the prettiest lie. That y'all don't know the turmoil within me, because I won't present it to you. And of course, that's another element of feeling like a burden. Nobody with depression, I think, ever wants to speak about their depression constantly, because they will feel like they're a burden. It's going to be a cycle of internal abuse. They're going to feel worse about themselves because they're a burden on other people, and then it just gets worse. So they don't tell other people that they're depressed, that things aren't working out for them, that they're not doing well. And then it talks about a outward appearance of all of this. It says, the unmade bed inside the room where I don't feel comfortable at all, where the blanket stared at me for hours and I stared back so self-righteously. It all comes down to the composure that's been lost. They don't have the energy to make their bed, and they feel bad about that. Once again, it's the cycle. They feel bad, or they don't have enough energy due to the depression to do such a simple task as cleaning the area that they live in. And because it's not clean, it feeds into their depression, and their depression gets worse, and they can't do it, and it's just a cycle. I think a lot of this, of course, does fit into the general feeling and vibe of the song. Although I do find it interesting that there's two vocals here. I'm not sure if I should read into that or if it's simply just an aspect of the band. Maybe they always have vocal harmonies in their tracks, and it's not anything specific to this, but the song itself is a very personal, introspective track about who I am, a singular I, and the way that I feel, and yet we have two voices presenting it. Now, that could be that people with depression also have the secondary voice, another part of their mind, the part that puts them down. But there isn't a distinction I found within the two sets of vocals and the lyrics that they present. They tend to be rather harmonious in the ideas that presenting. It isn't a battle between a positive voice and a negative. They're just all generally negative. It's a unification. So I'm kind of leaning towards it just being the way that they write music more so than anything that's thematically relevant to the music. But the song is dreary and lethargic and introspective, and so are the lyrics. All right. I feel like this is dang, I did the wrong one. I feel like this is going to be a heavy album. We are looking at 44 minutes of music now about 40 exact. A little under that. A little over that, actually. No, I can't add. 42. 42:05 is what we have ahead of us now. Many of these tracks are in the 2 to 3 minute range. There's a couple of 1s, there's a couple of 4s, there is a 5 and a 6. 12 tracks in total, though. Probably start grouping some up together, although it all really depends on how much I have to say about each song. So let's just push forward, see what's going on with Silently Leaving the Room. I like how the contrast exists between the weight of the tempo, the lack of speed in the vocal melody, even the weight in his voice, contrasting with the levity of the violin and the piano. Lots of reverb on the vocals too, which adds to the weight of it. That wasn't a particularly strong ending, but I think a lot of that has to do with a concept I didn't even think about for the first track, but certainly makes sense here, which is evolution, movement, direction. This song simply is. We do have an evolution of the idea. The back half of the track has a similar, if not identical, foundation. The vocal melody doesn't change much, but we do get a couple of embellishing concepts that change, such as the violin shifting from regular bowing to tremolo bowing. It elevates that. We also have a second vocal, I think, that comes in very quiet on the back half of the track, creating a sort of counterpoint to the primary vocals. But otherwise, we just have one really long A section on this track, and it is. The chord progression has a small sense of resolution at the end of it into the loop of it, but it isn't a very strong type of resolution. It's designed to have infinite cyclicality to it. It never feels like it reaches an end. It just keeps going in the circle. Every chord points to the next. And so to wrap this song up, you would have to change the chord progression. You need to have something with a stronger sense of resolution at the end of it, and they just opt not to allow the song to just sort of peter out. I think in the middle of the progression too, like we start the next one and then we just hold on to that second note and then allow it to fade out. So that also didn't really help with the resolution of it, which I suppose makes sense based off of the title alone. It is called Silently Leaving the Room. It's about ending an event without anyone knowing. You want to get out of this room, whatever it is. But, if it's a party, it's just a family meeting. Maybe it's just you in the room. You don't want your leave to be noticed, though. And so the song ends without resolution as well. It sort of just leaves. I think that's accurate. It's a nice way to represent that musically. This song, though, many of the things I would talk about are things we already talked about with track one. I didn't really want to stop here, except our next track is the most played one on the album. I figured it might have some more to talk about. I didn't want to try to remember everything from this one if that track is going to interest me more. And then track 4 is the longest one at 6.5 minutes. So again, I didn't really want to group 3 and 4 together. I didn't want to group 2 and 3 together. So I just decided to take a pause here. But the production is similar. It is growing on me though. Maybe it was also because we didn't have the two vocals as prominently here, which was the big hurdle for me. But without the drums, or even specifically that snare, there are very little elements of the production that stand out to me. It's just a bit more lower fidelity that I tend to enjoy casually. But yeah, nothing that's really stopping me from enjoying the music in any capacity. Beyond that, it's a low energy, depressive sound. It's just a heavy, weighty, dreary track. I did mention the contrast between half the instruments holding the song down and the other half having a bit of dexterity, some levity to them, I should say that. The piano does bring some dexterity to it. It's a bit bouncier, focusing on shorter notes, which feels nice against everything else just holding out these tones, including the violin, who simply operating at a higher range brings a little bit of levity to everything as well. So it is a nice sort of brightness within the darkness concept that I hear musically, but that's really about it. And it being a very lengthy song focused primarily on one idea, there's not much else to say. I am interested what the lyrics are going to be, though. As I mentioned, I heard a second vocalist, but I could barely make them out. They were very quiet in the track. And I suppose it acted as a bit of a counterpoint, even if they weren't placed as well in the mix to be a very direct counterpoint. It was still there. It was still another melody. So I'm curious what's being said there and why those words might have needed to be quieter than the rest. Let's dive into them. This song is about someone who has passed away, presumably by suicide, and sort of coming after the lines from the last track that had mentioned something about, telling everyone I was okay was the biggest lie I told tonight. It kind of goes along those same lines that nobody ever really knew what was going on, but it's all exceptionally clear now that the person is gone. Says the truth was deceiving when the hosts of the evening found the ghost that was bleeding drops of blood from the ceiling. I really like the rhyme scheme here, having that long E sounds so prominent throughout all of these tracks. It creates a nice ebb and flow to the lyrics rhythmically. It says everyone was laughing, we all prayed for a favor that the ghost would entertain us with some songs and some dancing. The idea that they found this ghost in this room and everyone thought it was a blast. Hey, ghost, do us some tricks. The idea here is that the ghost represents the depression and everyone blowing it off, laughing about it. That kind of idea. The end says, but by the stains of his blood, covered all the wood floors, opened all the windows and all of the doors, broke all of the bottles on streets down below. Some blood was frozen, blessed by wounded love. When the ice skates came on, the girls finally sang songs to the tunes of the laughter while silently leaving the room. The idea that this levity that everybody else has regarding the situation changes dramatically when the blood is apparent. It's no longer just drops of blood, little hints that if you knew what to look for, you could pick up on the depression. Now it's everywhere. You can't miss it. Now that they're gone, you see these elements of depression in all of their life. The more that you think about how they acted, the notes that they wrote, the way that they were, it's impossible to ignore. It says opened all the windows and the doors, signifying that light was coming in. Light is typically associated with truth. And it says it's blessed by the wounded love, which is something I haven't talked about yet. I jumped right to the back half of the lyrics because I think they're the most important. The wounded love is a callback to the first set of lyrics, which seemingly is about the end of a relationship. Silently leaving the room, gathering your thoughts from the floor, hopefully no one will hear you silently closing the door. Down the long stairs to the hall, out to the streets where you'll find rumored accounts and hearsay. Was it me who acted that way? Or is it you who should stay? I don't recall ever acting that way. Was it you who should have stayed? The idea that the relationship came to an end, a me and a you. The me is leaving. They've left the room, they've gathered everything, and as they're leaving, they hear all this conversation about the two of them. I don't think that this is necessarily something as more prominent in the adult world, but definitely teenagers, 20 somethings, where friend groups are still very tight. You tend to have all these whispers about things. Oh, they broke up. Well, that makes sense. You remember when he did this to her last month? Stuff like that. And so he hears these rumored accounts and hearsay. It could also be a metaphorical element of that, another projection of his internal voice that we heard about in the first song. Not to say that this album is a concept album, that these tracks are interconnected, but we have two songs about people who battle depression. I think it's easy to draw some parallels between them. So there's some conversation within himself. Was there any way that this relationship could have been better? Could it have soured the way that it did? Regardless, it led him to suicide, presumably, being that the relationship stanza runs right into the post-suicide stanza that talks about everybody discovering him and beginning to realize how stressed their mental state was. Now, we've been talking about this concept for a while now. Again, it's still relatively fresh in my mind, and I still entertain it because it is something that intrigues me. And I don't know if I necessarily want to bring it up for this album, given the heavy topics, but it's buy-in. It's the hurdles to enjoying something. I don't want to dismiss an album about depression. I don't know if that's the case, but we are 2 songs in. We have listened to 1/6 of the album, and it has been about depression so far. But I find it really difficult to get emotionally engaged in this song because of what it's about. Not particularly the depression, not the metaphor of finding the ghost. I think all of that is done really well. But the jump from I broke up with this person and so I committed suicide, and everybody is in pain now as they realize the pain I was in. I don't necessarily think that it has that sort of vindictive edge to it, but it is the story here. A relationship fell out. I committed suicide, which happened outside the lyrics, and then everybody found my body. That kind of thing. Metaphorically, of course. But it talks about how they would all laugh at this person's depression while they were alive, but now that they're dead, it hits them differently. And I just have a real tough time engaging with that. I 100% know if I had found this album when it came out, it might have come out just a little bit earlier than I got into my emo phase. Regardless, my teens, my early 20 somethings, really heavy into emo music, really finding lyrics like this to be exceptionally deep and engaging with it. I would have loved a track like this. But as it stands now, I'm like, a relationship ended and that's what caused the suicide. And again, I don't want to diminish anybody's experience. I don't want to diminish people's depression and how powerful it can be and how powerful the loss of a relationship can affect it. But I personally am at a place where I just can't connect with lyrics like this anymore. And so I feel like, assuming that this general vibe is going to be where the album goes, I think I will continue to say that the songs are heavy or dreary or emotionally resonant, but I doubt you're going to find me at a point where I am brought to tears or emotionally moved by any of this music, because I feel like I'm just too distanced from it and its topics. Which is, like I said, a bit of a shame given that 10 years prior I might have really engaged with this in a way that felt really powerful to me. And I think for some people, this might be music that is really powerful and affecting for them. And it's one of those cases, though, where I don't know that I'm going to be able to buy into it, though. It really depends on where the lyrics go. Particularly, I think more of the stuff like You Should Be Hated here is going to work for me better as it focuses more on the mental illness, and I think less of the songs like this that focus on romance. That's where I'm going to enjoy the album most. I did it again. Let's push forward. So You Want to Be a Superhero, which is an interesting title. We're going to have to stop at the end of it because I'm not going to let it run into the longest track on the album, but I don't know that it's going to be a really long analysis segment. We'll figure out when we get there. So we have a 4-chord phrase that we only play 3 of, which isn't totally unusual. But the chord that they choose to stick on just really hangs on to the tension. Once again, we have another twinkling melody line. Provide some levity to the weight of everything else. So it does resolve. It just hangs on to the leading tone for an extended period of time before it does so. There's a warble just on the vocal reverb. It creates a lot of dissonance. Yeah, so just a couple of ideas I want to touch on. One is that the vocals in that song well, all the songs have reverb on them. I think this is something we're going to see a lot of going forward, as a quarter of the tracks already have utilized it. It's a way to give some little bit of extra width to the vocals without making them sound overproduced. It also gives a little bit of... it provides an echo to them. For an album that's called Songs About Leaving, we have 3 songs so far that have either directly referenced the idea of leaving or have alluded to the idea of leaving, where leaving is both synonymous, or it's juxtaposed between suicide, leaving life, and leaving other things, rooms, relationships, whatever. It seems to run with these ideas in parallel, where each song can be viewed through either directive. I should say each mention of leaving can be viewed through either what do we call it? Definition of leaving, however you want to perceive it. But the reverb creates an echo, which I think is interesting. If these songs... well, we can look at it particularly from song 2, the one we just listened to prior to this, Silently Leaving the Room, about a person after they had died, talking about the effect they've had on people. An echo feels accurate for that. The reverberation, there's something non-human about it, something spirit-like. something otherworldly to it. And I wonder if that is an intentional effect to it, or again, just something that they have done on all their albums. Maybe it's just an effect they like, because as I mentioned, it works well within the indie rock, lower fidelity production sound in a way to increase the width of the vocals to match something that would be more accurate to a more higher fidelity production, without actually doing all the layers and all the production that would go into that, because that would remove the low fidelity quality that the songs are aiming for. But it is something I've continued to think about in parallel with the idea of leaving, of not being in a corporeal state anymore. I'm curious if that's something we'll hear a lot of. Speaking of the reverb, there's another effect on the vocals. It seems to only be on the reverb itself, which is this waviness, like, I don't know, oil on concrete on a hot day, and that waviness that comes off the road. But it's only on the reverb, so it doesn't match with the pitches coming out of the original vocal line. And so it creates a lot of clashing pitches. We get some dissonance. We get some dissonance in these tracks that doesn't really quite work for me in a semi-similar way to the microphones. I really hate bringing up the microphones so much in this album review, but it really is my closest analogy. It's lo-fi indie rock focusing on depression and loss of relationships and not having a great self-esteem. These are themes and styles of music that are explored similarly on both albums. So I'm going to try not to bring it up anymore. But yeah, I mean, it's hitting me in that same way. There were particular elements of that vocal melody that just didn't work for me, that I didn't like. It's not even that they bounced off of me. I did not enjoy listening to them. It's raw in a way that, well, I think that's the thing too, is it's not raw. On the microphones, it came through as the guitars were tuned one way, and he just wasn't that strong of a vocalist, or maybe he didn't want to be that strong of a vocalist and allowed his vocals to waver in pitch, creating microtonal discrepancies. This is literally using reverb to create a second vocal track that clashes with your primary. It's not raw, it's the production that adds it, which I think means, to me, it could have been easily removed. Somebody listened to this and said, yeah, that's exactly what we want. And, that's fine. I'm not telling them that they made a bad album or that was a bad production choice. It just absolutely does not work for me at all. I'm curious what other people think about that, though. Are you in the same camp as me, or do you find that to be something that embellishes and expands upon the emotional resonance of the song? The last thing I want to touch on before we hit lyrics is something that's been popping up in all the tracks, but I've only really touched on a little bit, is this embellishment. Twinkling ideas. We had the piano on both of the tracks? I can't remember what did it on this one now that I'm thinking about it. We had the piano on track 2 though. Faster moving lines with shorter notes. All 3 of these songs have been crafted in the foundational area with long held out notes. Our melody lines are typically, if they're not long held out notes, very slurred together, a very legato style of vocal delivery, wherein that we don't have sharp enunciation on specific syllables. It all just kind of flows together in a way it's not slurring them as far as speech slurring is concerned, but we are allowing the notes and the syllables to smoothly move into each other. Not quite a musical slur, but definitely on the legato style of note delivery. It allows everything to feel elongated, which crafts to me a weight and a slowness to the track. So when we have this instrument that tends to sit outside of that, creating these sharper, shorter notes that have very, not necessarily a staccato sound to them, but a distinct beginning and end of the note, it stands in contrast, and it's usually on an instrument that is higher in pitch with a brighter tone compared to everything else, which tends to be warmer and darker, in a way that makes it all feel like it's a juxtaposition, having some brightness in the dark. What I find interesting is that so far none of the lyrics have really alluded to any sort of brightness in the dark, and they've hyper fixated on the negativity of the situation. So the music, I can't really find a thematic reason for it. Now, on a purely musical level, 100%, I love these ideas. They're wonderful. I love the contrast to everything that's happening in them, and I would probably do something similar as well, as long as I wasn't trying to focus primarily on a negative component, because they aren't. So it makes me wonder what particularly, what their intention was with these ideas. It's come up often enough that it seems to be an element of their writing, and maybe that's just it. It isn't necessarily that it's supposed to mean anything or represent anything, just simply that that's how they make music. And from that perspective, again, I enjoy it, but I feel like it diminishes a little bit of the music's emotional connection with the lyrics, as the lyrics don't tend to have anything that would represent what this is bringing to the table, not even just on the direct level, but even thematically. I can't find anything bright or cheerful in any of the lyrics so far, any sort of silver lining. It just doesn't exist. Lyrically, these songs are hyper focused on the worst elements. So I find that to be an interesting contrast with a lot of the themes this album has explored so far. But I have a division within myself because I do love what it brings musically. Let's hit some lyrics and then check out the longest track on this album, which I think is going to be interesting given that all of their songs so far are focused on being an exploration of a single idea. Is this going to be a song that moves between concepts? Or is this going to be another one that is 6 minutes of one idea, a very long slow burn? Although I do want to make one quick note. This last track we checked out, track 3, So You Want to Be a Superhero, it does have a verse and a chorus. There is a different set of riffs and chord progressions between the two, but honestly, the way that they feel is very similar. It's difficult to tell them apart, aside from the fact that the chorus doesn't have that elongated second chord in the progression. We don't reside on that tense leading chord for as long. Every chord is equidistant from the next. Alright, and this song it's about leaving. It's about suicide. I'm pretty sure if this video were monetized, which none of my videos are, definitely demonetized from the number of times I have said suicide in the video already so far, and something tells me that's not going to change. It's about somebody laying asleep at 5 a.m. in the morning, staring at the wall, not able to go to sleep, and not able to scrounge up enough energy to get excited for tomorrow, saying, I might struggle through tomorrow, too much time in one day. I kind of like that idea, especially, for me, it's more of like those days when I'm not at 100%. I'm just waiting for the next day. I know that, when I wake up tomorrow, things will be better. I just need to get through today. And today's just so long. There's too much time in one day. Of course, it's a very different feeling for them, as it's not just trying to get through today, but it's trying to get through tomorrow and the day after that and all the days in the next week and all the weeks in the next month. It is something that doesn't end. Whereas for me, I have to get through this moment. For them, this is their life. There is a weight to that. It says they fill their time with boring thoughts and boring moods and boring bedtimes. It's a drain on them. Living is not fun. It's not exciting. It's nothing to look forward to. Every day is just filling time, and that's it. And there, I think, is a vast depth to that description. I think it's difficult to understand what people who are clinically depressed go through, how they perceive life, especially if you've never experienced depression yourself. This, I think, puts it very clearly. It's not about living. This description is about existing and nothing more. There's nothing positive that comes out of it. You simply are. You do these things because that's what you have to do. Your body demands food, it demands sleep. Uh, your house and the food that you need demand money, so you go to work. Your friends demand attention. Your family demands attention, so you go and see them. But all of it's just so boring to this person every minute. Even the thoughts within themselves, they don't seem to have wants or needs. They say that I occupy this time with my boring thoughts. Even being with myself isn't fun. That paints a very strong picture of what it's like to have depression in a way that I don't think I've ever heard before. They continue on saying, I won't tell a single soul that my soul's gone. It's even hard to write this song. It's all been a joke, because it's all been written down by someone who's probably dead. This person doesn't even have enough self-esteem to understand that their situation is unique, if for no other reason because of who they are. They see their depression and them thinking about suicide as a big joke, because as big of an issue as they make it out to be, they feel like it's no different than anybody else who has suffered from depression, and especially artists who have suffered from depression and have even committed suicide or possibly just died from natural causes. Their story is as old as time. People being depressed, finding life unbearable, writing a suicide note, and dying. The chorus comes in and says, I might be leaving soon, once again creating this juxtaposition between the leaving of a room or a relationship and leaving the planet, leaving your body behind. The second verse goes into more of these ideas of just being sleepless at night, hearing these sounds, and thinking about everything going wrong with your life. Talks about how they feel so empty now. They stare at the mirror and it's just blank. They don't see anything coming out of themselves. They don't exuberate any personality or anything. It's just a blank slate. They are existing and nothing more. At least that's how they perceive themselves. The outro speaks about how positive their dreams are, though. My dreams are full of what's not real. I'll fly away and save the world. I'll make you proud someday. I just won't be around to see your face. Life is best when I'm asleep. And what better way than to sleep forever? That's the idea that I get from them in this outro. The I'll make you proud someday, once again to me, sort of refers to the individual you, speaking about themselves again. I won't be able to see my own face when I finally leave this place, but we'll have done it, and you'll be proud of me then. That is kind of the feeling, the vibe I get from that. Alright, next up we have the longest track on the album, Septemeber, Come Take This Heart Away. Let's dive into that one and see where this album takes us next. think this is the first song that's really stood out to me a bit from the chamber pop perspective that was described earlier.
This room has so many windows, too many windows. I've sat and watched the trees fade outside. I hope the seasons treat you well. I hope the seasons treat you kind. As kind as I never was. As comforting as I never could be.
I love the way everything comes together on this. Just a beautiful idea.
Two fake long stem roses.
There's those drums again.
September, come please take this heart away. All of these windows bring in the cold air.
There's some sort of quick percussive sound at the bottom of all this.
You have a coat to keep you warm.
What is that?
Warmer than those last times we spoke. Warmer than the last words we said. I'm sure the wind blows gently on
Over here, you can hear some cymbal, very light cymbal ideas.
I hope that nothing will ever remind you of me. Glue that faded photo on a worn out journal page. The reads September, come please take this heart away.
I'm kind of curious what the purpose is on the snare sounds. It's another one of those decisions that seems totally wrong to me, in that it subverts the experience and the atmosphere, but they obviously liked it. I'm curious what it means to them, why they went with something so punctuated. It just cuts through it's piercing, that's what it is. First of all, that whirring sound was the percussive thing that I heard underneath everything. It's an interesting thing. I don't know what exactly it is, and I don't know that it added to the song since it was covered up by a majority of it. You really have to listen for it, but it's there. And it was allowed to be the last thing you hear. I'm also a little confused about the ending. So this isn't the only song that I've ever heard with a little bit of an ad lib of the recording process added to the end of a track. Um, but it is one where I feel like it subverts the feeling of it. The song is dreary and lethargic and heavy. It is probably another song about suicide. Musically, it fits with that. And then to punctuate the song, the very last thing you hear is, haha, Alex! And yeah, if that doesn't remove any of the tension and emotion of the track, I don't know what would for you. Uh, it's a situation where I don't feel like it was wise to do that. It feels subversive in a way that doesn't take the music seriously. On one hand, though, I kind of enjoy it because up until this point, I'm thinking to myself, the lyricist is a very damaged person. They're going through a lot of pain and this is how they're getting it out. I hope that they have the support structures they need. On the other hand, though, that ending kind of makes me think, oh, this is just something they do. Maybe they are a bit of a negative person, but maybe they aren't necessarily dealing with depression now. And so I get a fun, joking kind of vibe from the group, which runs parallel with the music, which is a positive thing, at least for me, knowing that the artists are safer than their music indicates they are. I don't know what their reasoning was for putting it there, but it has certainly had me think more about elements outside of the music than the music itself, which still feels like a net negative to me. Aside from the strange ending, though, one thing I do want to bring up that kind of bounces off of what we were just talking about is sincerity. I do feel like these people 100% feel what they're singing about. Especially the vocals. If the person wasn't battling depression while they recorded this, they were certainly digging deep into how they had felt battling depression somewhere else in their life. Other than that, they're just full of empathy, I suppose, and can fully embody somebody just having known people who might have battled depression. Regardless, I am sold that at least the characters being portrayed in this art legitimately feel depressed due to the acting that goes on, or maybe just, again, the delivery coming from a natural place from the vocalists. It all feels very sincere in a way that makes the art feel very close to the artist. That is something that is very difficult to fake. Like I said, you would need a ton of empathy and would probably need to know people who have gone through this to be able to embody a character like that. I am sold that in all four of the songs we've listened to, it's not just the music being dreary and depressive, but it's also the vocalists, the characters they're embodying and portraying that 100% feel like this. And for all I know, every single track on this album it comes from lived experiences. In which case, again, I hope everybody has really strong support networks that were a part of this because, yeah, you can feel it. I want to talk about something else now because I feel like it. I'm just going to talk about this other thing first because I want to put some space between what I'm going to say next and the conversation I just had. I like the drumming on this album. They don't pop up much. Usually it's a little light cymbal thing, like the light cymbal hit we saw at every bar off on the right in that last track. It's very sparsely used, allowing the rhythmic components of the rest of the instruments, plus the percussive nature of the acoustic guitar, to be the rhythmic elements in the track. I find that to be a really great way of writing, and I find it to fit with what's going on in the songs for the most part. There is a lightness and introspection. Everything is small. There really aren't any large sounds in the tracks. Until we get that snare drum. I don't I don't understand it. I mentioned in the video during the reaction, I don't get it. I think I'm just going to leave it at that. I was kind of hoping it was just something that we saw in the first track because we didn't hear any in the second and third, but it's just the snare tone they use and the production on it, and it just doesn't sound good to me. It's very piercing. It's got way too much treble in the EQ area. It's too loud. It just cuts through everything, and it is like, well, to use a phrase I've heard my family say when they have headaches, it's like an ice pick being driven into my skull. I don't typically like to use phrases as violent as that, but I think it's accurate. It is not a sound I enjoy, and every time I hear it, I, I don't know if I visually have it, but internally it's a little bit of a flinch. There's that snare again. It's just I don't enjoy it at all, and I think it detracts a lot from the ambient sound that they're creating with the album. It's supposed to feel introspective. It's supposed to feel weary and quiet. Everything is timid because these people are timid. They don't have anything to live for. They're not animated. They're not excited. Everything is a drag for them. The music reflects that. And then we have this loud snare that comes through. And maybe that violence is the purpose. Maybe it's supposed to be as irritating to me as living is for them, having me enter into a mindset similar to the characters here. Unfortunately, it just makes me want to skip to the next track. Maybe the right feeling that they wanted, but probably the wrong response. Because skipping to the next thing is in a bit of a less morbid take on things, kind of what suicide is. Instead of waiting for the afterlife, you skip to it because of an aspect of your current situation that isn't quite what you want. Now, this is probably way too deep of a read on it, and I might be grasping at straws a little bit, but it does kind of put me in that same mindset. I'm ready for the next thing. I just want this to stop. Again, probably not what they were going for, but that's where the snare puts me. And actually, that is a little bit better of a segue than I could have expected because it does add a lighter take on things, kind of moving away from the heaviness and using suicide in a lighter tone. I didn't want to move into this because there's a bit of a joke behind it, but I don't want to detract from the weight of the album, but this is my experience so far, is that it is an album of emo ballads. When I think of some of the big pop emo bands and some of the alt rock bands that took on very emo qualities to their writing, almost all of them had a ballad on their album, sometimes even two. Usually stripped down songs, removing all of the grit and intensity of the music, getting away from distorted instruments and using very light, ethereal, sometimes weary and tired vocal deliveries with sometimes just acoustic instrumentation. One of the first songs that comes to mind is My Chemical Romance's Desert Song, which was a bonus track from one of their live CDs. I think it was Life on the Murder Scene. That song would fit perfectly in this album. And that's like I said, that's how I feel about this album. It's a bunch of emo ballads tossed together all at once without any of the emo tracks that are more louder, aggressive, uh, getting away from the the acoustic guitar sound and bringing in heavier drums and sometimes screaming and electric guitars. I don't think I hate it, primarily because I love emo ballads. But I definitely like emo ballads in context. And I think this album is showcasing that I'm not a big fan of listening to just back to back ballads. I think any one of these songs in isolation would be great. Hearing them all back to back, though, is starting to drain on me, which, again, I don't know if I'm reading too much into it, but this album is about people who have been drained. The monotony of life sucking away any will to live. Now, I'm not going to make any jokes about how this album is sucking away my will to live, but it definitely puts me in a mindset where I'm ready for contrast. I'm ready for something else. And I don't know that it's going to give it to me. It's going to continue to beat me down, to wear me down. At least I think that's how it's going to go, especially since it is described as a slowcore band, and I think this is just what slowcore is. I think maybe, probably not, but I think there's a small chance we might get some contrast in here, much like how most bands would have loud albums with a ballad. This might be a softer band with one more energetic track in it, but I honestly am not even expecting that. I think it'd be interesting. You just don't hear about that too often. Like, could you imagine just listening to like an art pop or a baroque pop album and then just having a hard rock track in there or an alternative rock track or something? It's like, that doesn't really fit in a way that ballads don't really fit, but we've just kind of accepted them on rock albums. And even earlier metal albums. I don't think we really do it as much anymore. Hair metal, though, at least specifically, feel like the ballad, there was always a ballad on an album. I don't know if I never listened to enough heavy metal. And the more I listen to death metal and black metal, I don't think we've listened to any album with ballads on it. Although I suppose for them, it would just be, this song has clean vocals in it. And you're like, whoa, what? Oh, man. Uh, let's hit some lyrics. This song is about the end of a relationship and having some comforting words for the other person. Starts with, the room has so many windows, too many windows. I sat and watched the trees framed to fade outside. I hope the seasons treat you well. I hope they treat you kind as I never was, as comforting as I never could be. The annotation states that the idea of having too many windows could be pulling us back to silently leaving the room, where the idea of windows being opened, shedding light on the idea, could be about truth. And so in this case, too many windows would be too many signs that things weren't going well. That this relationship was sort of destined to end if you actually paid attention to anything. But he says, I hope that life treats you better than I ever did. Verse 2, all of these windows bring in the cold air. I hope you have a coat to keep you warm. Warmer than those last times we spoke, than the last words we said. I'm sure the wind blows gently on you now. I hope that nothing will ever remind you of me. Once again, having nothing but well wishes for this other person, knowing that they were not the best friend to them. The chorus to both simply says, "September, come please take this heart away." Which I'm not exactly sure what that means. The annotation mentions an allusion to November 16th possibly being the day that the relationship ended. It also brings up some ideas about songs having continuity in a way that implies this is a concept album, but I have not seen anything about that yet. So I'm not sure how to take that. I'm sure as we get further into the album, I might be able to see more clues regarding that, but so far everything has felt isolated, thematically connected, but not narratively. And they hope that the wish here is they could go back to September before their heart was broken. I don't think that's a very strong read of this. September, please come take this heart away. It's not about repairing the heart, it's about removing it. It's not about going back to the way it was, it's about a further change to the state of things. It talks about the future, not the past. So I'm not sure that's a strong read of it, but I also don't know what the read would be. Why specifically September? Any month could remove the pain in a heart. So I don't know. There's also an idea of 2 fake long-stemmed roses on a windshield of a car. I don't know. The annotation talks about crack pipes being these fake roses, and what? I don't think there's been any drug illusion in any of this album so far, so that seems like a bit of a stretch to me as well. But again, I don't have anything to have a proper rebuttal because I don't quite know what it's talking about either. With that said, let's push forward into the next track, which has a very blatant title to it. Ignorant Piece of Shit. Something tells me that this is going to be a song about the narrator's self and their lack of self-esteem, the way they feel about themselves. That's been a recurring theme throughout this album, and it makes sense for the title. Let's dive into it. Oh wait, what? Interesting transition into this idea. It's a variation on that guitar lick with an expanded sound. The snare actually sounds pretty good in this situation. We also have a bass kick that we've never heard before. We have the female vocals in on this one too. It's interesting, the movement of the violin is forward pressed, the lyrics were dragging, and the distance between them really felt like there was a temporal thing going on where somebody was not on time with the band, but as far as I could tell, everything was. It was just an illusion. Heavily playing around with time. Well, that was definitely a piano song. And if I'm to assume correctly, it is the only piano song on this album. Yeah, track 5 though, Ignorant Piece of Shit. I think that they really found their stride with the drum production. I don't know that it's necessarily going to be something that sticks around because given that we've heard the snare sound on 2 other tracks, this is the outlier, which makes me think that the other ones are still intentional, and this is intentional as well. They changed it specifically for what the song was aiming for, but I thought that the whole band sounded great at that moment. It's one of the few times where every instrument has been present in a way that feels natural, feels correct to my ears. It's also one of the fullest moments of the album. Everything else has been really light. Maybe it's been designed to, the word I've used a lot is introspective. There's a lot of space in their songs. They're all rather quiet, lots of timid instruments all playing alongside each other, but none of them really trying to fill the space and make a large vibe. And track 5 does. It stands out from the rest of the album in that way. And I find that to be interesting. Now, something I don't know that I've brought up too much yet is that I enjoy the variation on the album. I think that they have a very strong idea of how to create variations, not within specific segments, but variations on themes, in that they can craft a melody, understand what makes the heart of that melody, and remove or modify the sections that are embellishing or secondary to it so that we can present something new that feels like where we just were. And I say this particularly with melody because that's where the changes tend to be altered. Sometimes we have chordal changes, but not commonly. The chords throughout songs tend to be rather static throughout the entirety of it. It's what gives these songs the feeling of being stuck in a mood, stuck in a vibe. It makes sense since the songs are all primarily lyrically, singularly about a topic. It is a hyperfixation on a moment, a hyperfixation on a feeling, a hyperfixation on an event, the way that this person is, a specific mood. And so, foundationally, we don't really get much change through the song. It allows them to feel musically hyper focused, or sorry, just as hyper focused as the lyrics are. But that isn't to say that the songs are static either. There's always some type of movement, and a lot of that comes from the melody. Just looking at the piano song there, you can listen to how both the piano and the violin modify their lines throughout that track. There's really three moments in that song. We have the intro 40 seconds, we have the modification of the violin line in the middle, and then we have the second violin modification with the piano modification that both reduce their complexity to leave room for the vocals to come in at the end. The idea, the vibe, the emotion, the atmosphere is identical throughout the whole song, but there are subtle adjustments throughout in order to achieve different effects or room or space or just melody. Maybe they got tired of playing what they were playing for the first 40 seconds and just wanted something new, and so they did. But they did it in a way that didn't bring in an entirely new concept. The melody had still the key elements of it intact. Maybe that's specific notes on specific beats in order to present a movement, maybe a falling or a rising idea, but the embellishing lines, the secondary notes to those key notes, are changed. Maybe some are removed entirely, introducing silence. Some notes might be lengthened, elongated, or shortened. But the key element is still there. You can still tell, oh, that's what we were listening to before. It's just not the same. Maybe you don't know why it's not the same. Maybe you don't know how it's been changed, but you can still feel a lot of that original vibe in it. They're masters of this. It isn't just the piano song. We can hear this throughout all 6 tracks we've listened to, these micro adjustments of melody. I really like that. Even going back to track 1, shifting from harmony to counterpoint in the vocal layering is an idea of this. They just find these really great ways of retaining an emotion or a vibe, but changing up the notes themselves without moving too far from the original concept. It's phenomenal, actually. It takes people forever, composers forever to figure out this type of writing, and they seem to have picked it up in, well, I was going to say 2 years. Maybe their first album kicked off with this style too, but they were formed in 95. This album came out 7 years after they formed. But yeah, I mean, this shows a real strong understanding of melodic writing in general. And maybe that's all gut. Maybe they don't have any theory training. Maybe they couldn't explain to you why they made the changes they did, but they absolutely understood in some level how melody is crafted and how to manipulate it to change it in ways where it doesn't change. And it's just, I can't not praise that. The more I hear it, the more I love it. Lyrics. Interestingly enough, this song is not one about leaving. It speaks from the narrator's perspective in a relationship with somebody who is a bit more impulsive than they might like, though they do find an admiration for this type of reluctance to care about consequences or people's opinions or anything like that. It starts off looking right around. And how will I know when you'll decide to jump out of a window? Falling faster, I can imagine the ways that you'd roll your eyes before you hit the ground. The idea that you're impulsive, you can do anything, even something so wild as jump out of a window, and even that you'll be able to dismiss The consequence, jumping out the window, you're eventually going to hit the ground, right? And even you'd be like, geez, hitting the ground. You roll your eyes at it. You just kind of dismiss the consequence of this action. At the end of our second verse, which is labeled as a bridge, but I don't know if I can agree with that entirely. It says, I like the way you roll your eyes right before you fall down. There's this type of admiration because the narrator just can't do that. Everything always weighs down on them, it seems. Also talks about how the relationship isn't great, though. So telling everyone you know, maybe I'll be bad for you, maybe you're too good for me. Everyone's getting screwed, though. Well, if the shoe fits, then put it on and wear it like a crown. The outro repeats one stanza twice. On bended knee, will you marry me? And on November 16th, everything was buried down. This part doesn't make any sense to me. I mean, obviously, there was a marriage proposal. Was that on November 16th? Was the marriage proposal the beginning of the end? Or was there a marriage proposal and then on November 16th everything was buried down? I don't know. If it's the latter, I don't see how the two need to be put next to each other. I don't see how they relate. If it's the former, it doesn't quite read that way to me. But yeah, this song is admittedly a lot less pessimistic, less focused on depression. It is about a failing relationship, but not about leaving. The piano song only has 4 lines. You'll find relief somewhere between the tree and its shade. When you go away, heaven's a distance, not a place. Which is interesting. Heaven is just comfort. It's peace of sorts. It says when you go away, and away could be read in multiple ways, as we've already talked about the way that leaving represents a dual meaning. But heaven could mean a distance between the people, or it could be a distance from where they currently are, temporally or physically, moving to a different place, or simply aging, going through time to where this moment doesn't hurt as much. But that's it. I don't know how that connects to the music of the piano song in any way, unfortunately. So let's move into the next duo of tracks. They'll only miss you when you leave. I should have guessed that. And the second track will be A New Holiday, November 16th, which was presumably the day that this relationship went to hell. So, I don't know. Interestingly, this is also the last of the songs that people tend to care about. There's been a few tracks that we've listened to in the multiple millions of plays. After this, though, the next few tracks are all in the hundreds of thousands, with the highest being 683 and the rest of them sitting in the 3 and 400,000. A vastly different look than track 3, So You Want to Be a Superhero at 3.4 million. The first half of this album is full of hits. The back half is barely listened to relatively. So let's see what makes this one so interesting, and then we'll begin the group of the less popular tracks. beautiful writing.
Not another sunrise, another dry still tasting your mouth. You walked away from waking up inside that house.
So much like track 5, we have another full song here, full band.
Felt just like a song you loved so long ago. You can hear it now. Loneliness you leave, so you try and stay away. You just might be the love in their eyes when they subtract all the times you sat there, trying not to say goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Telephones and postcards with misshaped hearts beside the names I've read this letter for. The 100th time today I've rearranged, analyzed the words, try to find something between the lines that wasn't there. At least now I can see these worn out eyes on torn up pages. Don't know how I'll fall asleep
I mean, obviously the word leave appears in a lot of these tracks, but he also talked about torn out pages, which we saw on September Come Take This Heart Away. I'm curious how many lyrical callbacks there are.
outside the window, off
Windows, that's another one.
the storm will slowly close in on me when it's time to leave. 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 You're whole again now. It's an obvious reflection concealing my neck.
It's an interesting delay on these two vocal tracks.
Nervous laughter filled all the voids when I declared you your own holiday. Your voice will sound different, though I've heard it before. Remember the winters that we slept in the car. You said your crooked legs don't walk so well. I said my eyes were tired and declared you your own holiday. 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 You'll be here. You'll be here. You'll be here.
All right. There's a TikTok kind of thing going on here where we have a big song, track 5, at 3 minutes 15 seconds. Also a big song sound wise, as that was the first song we had with the full band that was mixed traditionally. Track 7 is almost 5 minutes long. It's what we listened to just before this one. Track 9 is 5.5, and track 11 is 5:16. These are all large songs. What comes after them are shorter ones. Track 6 was just 2. This one was 1:52. Track 10 is only 3, and track 12 is less than 3. It's this TikTok of full song interlude, full song interlude, full song interlude. Now, I don't know if I would necessarily call this an interlude nor the piano song, but it does kind of embody the idea. A large track and a smaller track that helps transition us to another idea, possibly. We're also going to finish the album off on one of the shorter songs, also the one that has been played the least, which just makes sense. People don't make it to end of albums anymore, so whatever. But yeah, I started to notice that at track 5, I was like, wait a second. We're going back and forth here. Short, long, short, long. I'm curious if that was intentional, if that means anything to them, this back and forth concept, or if it's just how this album ended up coming together. But that does mean that the rest of this album is going to go that way. After this analysis, we're going to listen to the 5.5 and then the 3, and then we'll take an analysis break and then listen to the 5.25 and then the 250. And that'll be the end of the video there. Well, we'll have an analysis section after that and all that. Yeah, so it does a nice job of breaking up the album into these 2-song bites here at the end. Though I am curious if the shorter tracks should be played as an introduction to the longer ones, which is the opposite here, where we play them as a finishing point, moving on from a longer track into it and then taking a break. I don't know. The other thing I wanted to bring up is how real are the lyrics? How much from the lyricist's experience is pulled into the words? Primarily because there was one line in there, I think it was this one, A New Holiday, and he said something like, you got out of the car and you said you had crooked legs or something, and I said my eyes were tired and I declared this a holiday, or something like that. And like, it's kind of worded oddly in a way that feels real. It's not heightened, it's not poetically adjusted, it's kind of cumbersome both in the delivery of it and the meaning behind it. It's not in a really strong metaphorical way. It just kind of feels like a real conversation. It doesn't really add much, I think, to the story. Not what I've picked up so far, but this concept has been on my mind a little bit due to last week. We checked out a song by Lingua Ignota that I had a lot of positive things to say about. Talked about how it was a cohesive experience, lyrically, thematically, musically, all of it comes together well. And someone put into the comments that there's another layer to this in that it is real on a lot of levels. The song is about somebody who is abused asking God to strike down their abuser. In reality, there is an abuser. The person who goes by the alias of Lingua Ignota was abused by this person, and she is also part of I don't remember the name of the church, but she is like ordained within it and stuff like that. So like it was more than just performance art. It was, as they stated, performance ritual, just recorded. There is a lot of reality to that song. And it completely changed my approach to it, my relationship to it as art. I'm curious how much of this is real. Not necessarily from a level of me deepening my understanding, but there's a lot of lines on this album so far that don't make any sense to me, that might make a lot of sense to the person writing them, not because they wrote them, but because they're real sentences said during real events that are running parallel to the fictionalized or possibly fictionalized stories of the album. And that was just one of those lines when I thought to myself, that's a really strange line. It's one of those things that can only come out of reality. Well, I say only, that's a bit of an extremity. It makes more sense coming out of reality. Real life is messy. Art typically isn't. Art's controlled. There's a lot less stuff put up to chance with art. When I hear messy lyrics like that, I tend to think that they might have a little bit more root in the real world than in the world of fiction. So if anybody is more familiar with the lyricist, this band, this album, let me know. Because it could quite possibly be that there's a lot more reality in this album than I originally gave it credit for. Especially after I think it was So You Want to Be a Superhero? Is that the one that ended with the ad lib studio take? So maybe that was September Come Take This Heart Away. That's what it was, because it was the really lengthy instrumental outro on that. And that sort of, to me, that divorces the artist from the art, but maybe that's not true. The lyrics sometimes tell a different story. Um, yeah, they really stick within their lane, don't they? I wish there was something new I could bring up about these two tracks here. I know that, I don't know if it was criticism or simply an observation, but it's been noted that these album reactions tend to be less about the individual songs and more about the album as the album goes on. I can think of a couple of albums that go against that, but I think that's generally true for the format. And it's simply because, especially with bands like this, what I would say about the opening songs is the same thing I would say about the closing songs. In fact, if I wanted to pick apart these two tracks and analyze them, I'd probably say something along the lines that they have a rougher production to them. They're very dreary, low energy, have a depressive feel to them. The vocals are produced in a way that kind of give them a muddiness and a dreariness as well. And there's, what was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, yeah, there's embellishing elements to it. The vocals sound very sincere. And there's melodic variation across the tracks. They do what they do very well. um, Interestingly, though, the more that I think about these last two tracks, they are dreary, they are low energy, but there's a bit more brightness to them than I remember the other tracks. It's quite possible that, well, at least specifically with track 8, A New Holiday, that lyrically it will be a bit brighter than the rest because of the extra embellishment we got out of the piano and violin, and even the vocals a little bit on this one too. But that juxtaposition has always been there. I feel like it's just more divided on this specific track. But yeah, so like I totally acknowledge we've reached the 2 hour mark here. I'm going to be saying less and less about these songs, particularly because everything I would say I already have said. I don't want to repeat myself because the videos are already long enough. But yeah, I just wanted to point that out in case anybody was wondering, hey, what are your thoughts on this track? You really didn't give us too many. It's pretty much the same thoughts as everything else. And if there's something that's going to differ, I'll mention it. I'll bring it up. If there's a song that's completely different, of course, we'll dive into that quite a bit harder. But, I mean, as it is, they do what they do very well. And all the observations I made at the beginning are still valid with these later tracks. Let's hit some lyrics before we go into one of the more interestingly titled tracks. They'll Only Miss You When You Leave is another song about a breakup. This one also kind of drawing parallels between the end of a relationship and leaving life, suicide again. It says, not another sunrise, another dry, stale taste in your mouth. You walked away from waking up inside of that house. So waking up is terrible for this person. They just have this dry, stale taste in their mouth. Metaphorically, it's just waking up isn't great. And every time they wake up, they're reminded that the person who used to wake up next to them has chosen not to anymore. Verse 2 says, you can hear it now. They'll only miss you if you leave, so you try and stay away. You just might be the love in their eyes. Trying to keep that distance, right? Verse 3, telephones and postcards with misshaped hearts beside the names. I've read this letter for the 100th time today. I rearranged, analyzed the words, tried to find something between the lines that wasn't there. At least now I can see through these worn out lines on torn up pages. I don't know how I'll fall asleep tonight. So the other person left, and they're like, you know what, I'm going to keep my distance, right? If I don't pursue them, they'll love me more. But then they get a card. They get the telephone calls, and they cherish them dearly, analyzing them, scrutinizing them, trying to find between the lines the notion that the other person loves them too. But they don't. As they say, at least now I can see. He says, I don't know how I'll fall asleep tonight. The tonight is repeated over and over and over, I think to indicate the many sleepless nights ahead of them. Once again, we have a mention of a window. It says, outside the window is awful weather. I'm not quite sure how this works into the metaphor. The window has consistently been utilized as a way of shedding light, of introducing truth to a concept. Alternatively, though, I believe this could be a way of viewing the turmoil inside, once again hiding it on the surface, but having a window of truth to the interior, to see that inside there's awful weather, a storm closing in on them. That is how that song wraps up. The next one I don't really get. It's another one of those sets of lyrics with disjointed sentences strewn together. It says you're whole again now. I don't know when they were not whole, when they were fragmented. I also don't know who the your is. I assume the narrator has been consistent throughout all these tracks, but I don't know. It says it's an obvious reflection. Can see it in my neck. Taking slow dancing lessons. Nervous laughter filled all the voids when I declared you your own holiday. Oh, that part makes sense. The own holiday. A holiday just for you, just for us. The proposal. It's the day we got engaged. Presumably, if they don't get married within the next year, they'll have an proposal anniversary, a holiday just for the two of them. So, when I proposed to you, nervous laughter filled all the voids. This person he was proposing to was not in on this. Their heart was not in the relationship as strongly. Says your voice sounded different, though I've heard it before. I remember the winters that we slept in the car. You said your crooked legs don't walk so well, and I said my eyes were tired, and I declared you your own holiday. Again, I don't quite get it. The outro, though, repeatedly says, you'll be here. So, I don't usually talk too much about my personal life. Usually, if it's something personal, it's about me and myself and the way that I reflect on music, not really going so much into relationships and stuff like that. So, this is a rare moment, but the idea of proposing to somebody and having a nervous laughter go along with that proposal is something I've lived through. And interestingly, it sounds like this relationship didn't last very much longer, as we could see a couple of tracks earlier when he said that this date, November 16th, everything was buried down. I kind of read that as things went for the worse from here. And if this date, November 16th, so this is like a conceptual thing going on, right? This is the new holiday. This was the day of proposal. This is their engagement anniversary. Things went downhill from here. This happened to me. Like I can connect with this on a way I wasn't expecting. I proposed to somebody once, and there was some awkward laughter, and I kid you not, like 5 weeks later, we were broken up. We were just not on the same page on things. And so I find it very bizarre that this album kind of captures that. Yeah, I can't say I was prepared for any of that to happen in this album. Wild. All right. Moving on. We got 4 tracks to go. Like I mentioned, we're going to do 2 groups of 2 with this. 1 longer track, 1 shorter one. Let's push forward to Farewell to All These Rotten Teeth. And like I said, we're going to go to the next track after that, which has a title which I am intrigued by just because it's one of those weird titles. It's Sophisticated Fuck Princess, Please Leave Me Alone. What does that mean? The lyrics on that one's going to be interesting, I think. Before we get there, though, let's check out Farewell to All These Rotten Teeth. Ooh, I was gonna start saying it's a nice slow burn, but they're picking it up real quick. Nice 50 seconds of building of ideas and then just toss all the top end on at the same time. I love the way the piano and the violin and the guitar are all playing off of each other right here. Well, in the last section anyways.
Leave the skin and bones to dry. Leave the skin and bones to dry.
I like how the guitar felt like the lead, and they turned that line into a foundational one once the violin picked up. Now this isn't the first instrumental we've had on the album. Well, instrumental section, I should say. The beginning of the piano song we had one, and the outro to September had one. Absolutely beautiful. It's keeping it light and introspective here. The somber element still present, just doesn't carry as much weight. In that it isn't as present anymore. Kept a little bit more to the inside, which is a recurring theme throughout the album.
About you, and yes, see where it's true. Thought you could get all you wanted by just thinking of yourself. It's not your pretty face that matters, and I think you need some help. So please, just leave me the hell alone. 'Cause now I know this isn't at all
How old were they when they made
How
this?
much more times will I have to tell you? You try to cry, but it's just for show. You know, I know, you know. Saying sad things that don't make sense can just make you look like a liar. Don't convince me that you're right about some fear I have of heartache. So I'll make you just one promise that I'll never regret this.
I love that effect.
Take a long look inside, 'cause right now I'm leaving you. Take a long look inside, 'cause right now I'm leaving. Take a long look inside, 'cause right now I'm leaving you.
Another track with an uneventful ending, sort of abruptly stopping at a point that's unexpected. What was it, the third repetition? That's not a place to stop something. Where's the symmetry? And no, I'm just kidding. That's a good way to keep your audience guessing and on their toes, and to create something that feels a bit abrupt. And it certainly does. It's it's a weird harmonic place to stop. It's a weird rhythmic and phrasing place to stop. And it's not the first time they've done it on the album either. So they're definitely trying to lean into those emotions. Now I have had some couple of ideas that I don't know how we haven't talked about yet that I feel need to be brought up. First off is their spacious layering, and I slightly alluded to this earlier on. I think it was after the second track. Every instrument is well aware of every other instrument. This is a joint process between the composition and the production. Is there a producer on these albums that is not in the band? Produced by Chris Walla, written by Carissa's Wierd. We don't have a lyricist, which I was kind of curious about that too. Also a mastering engineer of Ed Brooks. So yeah. Oh, and the mixer is also Chris Walla. So the engineering side is, the production side is completely different people than the composition side. So there must have been a lot of talk, crossover between the two to make sure that it sounds the way they want it to. Because the composition has to be a certain way in order to allow all the instruments to have the room that they have, but it also needs to be produced in a way to deliver that as well. And on tracks such as So You Want to Be a Superhero, where we have all the instruments playing, it still needs to have a spaciousness to it. That introspective quality has to be present at all times. And so there must have been a lot of work going on between these two groups of people to ensure that every track has this type of production to it. To make sure that no matter how busy things get going, especially like, man, these two songs bled over. I think it was the last one, Farewell to All These Rotten Teeth, where I'd mentioned that the guitar was rather busy, almost like a lead element in itself, and then it became the foundation to the piano and the guitar and the violin. That was a really busy section, and yet it still sounded spacious. Nobody was really on top of each other. There was still a lot of room for everything in the mix. That was written in a way that a lot of that weight was put on the production. But then we have tracks like the one we just listened to, or A New Holiday, where it's a very spacious production. It's very spacious composition where there's not a lot of instruments going or playing at once, and the production has to fill it out a little bit so it doesn't feel too sparse. A lot of back and forth went in on this album to ensure that every song has a similar vibe to it, regardless of what the composition was, because the end result needs to feel a way. And I really appreciate that. I don't think it's too often we talk about this, but it is very much a conversation between the two. I think it's easier to get that when you are the composer and the producer, and I know I've seen a few bands where the producer credit is somebody in the band so that their vision is enacted upon on the composition, performance, and engineering side of things. They just have a hand in everything. This isn't one of those, so there would have had to been a lot of communication there. I think that's a really cool note. The spacious layering also lends itself into the overall vibe of things. Nothing ever feels weighty. Even on the heavier moments, maybe some of the instruments have extra weight or body to them, it all still feels spacious. And I think, to me, what that represents is that most of this album has happened already. There's a lot of reverb-y things going on with vocals. There's a lot of spaciousness that to me implies thoughtfulness or introspection. It gives me the feeling that every song is a memory. It's not something that happened, is happening now. It is something that has happened prior, and we are reflecting on it. I don't know if that's necessarily true, especially since I'm still kind of unsure if this is a concept album or not, but I think the idea of reflection is still present in most of these tracks. They are about the present feelings about something that's already happened. Regardless of the something that's already happened is connected in any way to any other song lyrically. The idea is many of these songs directly in the lyrics state this is how I'm feeling because this is how things used to be. So I think having this introspective idea of being stuck in your mind, the spaciousness and emptiness of that, and the reverb and like all the little details all push into this concept, and it gives the album a very strong identity in that regard. My next two thoughts sort of go hand in hand. I wrote captivating instrumentals, and I stand behind that. We've had many moments on this track that feature extended instrumental composition. The one we just checked out, Farewell to All These Rotten Teeth, the back half of that is purely instrumental. It's like 2.5 minutes long of the piano and the guitar and the violin just taking the song in a specific direction and leaning into an emotion and a vibe, and the way that the instruments just bounce off of each other. They're rhythmically, harmonically, melodically, they're all entwined and separated. It's phenomenal. I love the way that they write these sections. It just takes the counterpoint that we saw at the beginning of the album with the opening track and shoots it up to the next level. Everybody is foundation, everybody is rhythmic, everybody is melody. It is really great writing, and it's all melody technically. It's the counterpoint that provides the harmonic information, the rhythmic information. It sort of leans into what I spoke about earlier, that these guys just have a really great concept of melody writing. At the time, I was talking about variation, of understanding what was key to the identity of a melody and what could be discarded to be revamped. But here, it's even an understanding of how multiple melodies can make a section of a song stand out, can help propel it forward, can help it stay stagnant, can help it be interesting when it's not doing much of anything. They just have a knack for writing great melody. And I think that's one of my big takeaways. Something that leans into this, though, is that it isn't just about the melodies. The other half is dynamic qualities. I love the way that they play around with articulation and volume dynamics. even in the most layered of sections, going for the biggest sound that they can create, some of the instruments still decide to duck out sometimes, playing some notes a little quieter than others, going for a softer picking style or a softer bowing style. Then, 2 notes later, when they'll play something a bit harsher and have more of a staccato, aggressive accent to the beginning of the note. There is a lot of human elements to the performance in these tracks, and I absolutely love that. In fact, the song we just listened to, the final moments of it, musically felt like breathing to me. The ebb and flow of volume rising and falling. You've probably heard that all across this album, and it just dawned on me now that it's a core element of their composition and performance style that I couldn't not talk about it, especially with only one analysis segment ahead of me. Would I have remembered to do that? So I wanted to take the moment right now, and it just happened to work well with the captivating instrumental writing section. Because it does all come together. Though composition is solid, but good composition can still sound bad if the performance isn't great, and they elevate what they're writing through the way they perform it. It is just phenomenal. It is my big takeaway on this, and the more that I listen, the more I find that I'm enjoying, I think, the later works here, which is inverse to the play numbers. And I get it. The last 3 songs we listened to, and we'll include piano song for in that group since it is also one of the lower played songs. They're more instrumental than lyrical. The beginning of this album, I think, works with more tried and true pop style structure and delivery. They're very focused on lyrics. The music is coloring to that. The story is delivered primarily through the words with very light use of the instruments. We do get a taste of some of the stuff we would be exploring in the later tracks, but it is just that, a taste. I likened a lot of that to pop emo ballads, but here, Sophisticated Fuck Princess, Farewell to These Rotten Teeth. These 2 songs I would very clearly put into Baroque pop, with an emphasis towards the Baroque side. It is poppier harmonies, but the Baroque elements of how the instruments are played certainly shine through clearly. They have a strong understanding that the performance is just as important as the composition. But also the counterpoint and layering and all of this lean towards the Baroque side of things as well. It is music that speaks to me a bit more, especially since I found the lyrics were my biggest hurdle. As we've gone forward, I found a little bit more commonplace or commonality with the lyrics in unusual ways, but it's still an album that genuinely feels just a bit too divorced from me. It views relationships in a heightened state, which makes sense for younger people, as relationships are still fairly new and important to them. And that's not to say as you get older, relationships are less important, but the end of a relationship tends to sting just a little bit less, and we tend to be a little less melodramatic about it, as life experience colors our experiences differently. But here at the end, I can feel the emotion that they're going for and focus on that with a lot more focus, a lot more emphasis than the lyrics, which, again, are fine, just not anything I can connect with. And so moving towards a more instrument-based writing style works better for me. It allows me to enjoy what they're trying to achieve, whereas your average listener is going to be more focused on lyrics, so the opening tracks are going to be more popular with them. That makes a lot of sense to me. It also makes me wonder how Spotify registers a play. If I simply start a song, does it take that? Do I have to listen to half of the song, all of the song? There's certainly tracks like Farewell to All These Rotten Teeth where I could see people listening to the first 2 minutes of it and skipping the instrumental outro. Would that count as a play? If not, certainly see why it has a lower play count than some of the other tracks. So, I mean, that really didn't have much to do with the album, just something I've been thinking about. I find it bizarre that you could enjoy some of the earlier tracks as much as their plays indicate, and then just not listen to the back half. A couple of singles, like a couple of points of like multiple million plays, sure, but half the album has multiple million plays and half barely breaks 300,000. That's a very strange discrepancy to me. Let's hit some lyrics. Farewell to All These Rotten Teeth is about letting go of some rotten teeth. Metaphorically, of course, it's about something that is broken and can't be fixed. It's one of the weird things about teeth. A lot of our bodies are pretty good at healing, but not our teeth. Once they start to get to a point where you would describe them as rotten, the only thing you can do is pull them. Otherwise, they can continue to infect your mouth, your gums, all of it. You have to get rid of them. That, I think, is what this song is about. After that, track 10. This is about ending the relationship with somebody who you now know is pulling you down. Verse 1 says, I still recall what made me like you. So yes, they have said things about you, and yes, I see where it's true. Other people have said that you weren't good for me. I didn't believe them at the time, but of course I do now. The song talks about how this person is very selfish and conceited. Says you thought you could get all you wanted by just thinking of yourself. It's not your pretty face that matters, and I think you need some help. Apparently, this other person continues to try to get them back, though. Says, please just leave me alone because I know that this isn't all right. How many times will I have to tell you? Also shows that they are never sincere in what they say. It says you try to cry, but it's just for show. And you know that I know you know. You don't really care about any of this. You just like the relationship for whatever it is, but you don't care about me. You don't see me as a person. You just don't want me to leave because then you're alone. The outro says, take a long look inside because right now I'm leaving. Reflect on what you've done. I'm not coming back. You're not getting me back again. You've done this, and if you don't want this to happen again, you need to be better with the next person. That kind of vibe. So, let's wrap this up. Low budget, slow motion soundtrack song for the leaving scene. Okay, so I haven't really brought this up much because I feel like a majority of the music here is designed to be listened to in isolation. It's not designed to be part of a multimedia project, but there are certainly a couple of moments on here where I feel like the instrumental sections would do very well behind scenes in a movie or TV show. It's one of those types of music that I think could very easily be picked up as licensed music to play behind a teen drama scene kind of thing. I think they're even making fun of that themselves, realizing just how well their music would fit within teen dramas and just as a soundtrack in general. So let's dive into this and then we'll wrap it up with March 19th, 1983. It was probably green. So much more emphasis on the acoustic guitar here than ever before. You really hear the percussive nature of whatever strings they're using.
How long will you be gone? How soon till you'll come home? Where is your sweetheart who shelters her from the cold now? The cold now. Absence only made our hearts grow colder. I will be waiting. I'll just keep waiting for you. For you.
Yeah, I like how the violin comes in here, does a little bit of call and response with the vocals on that second for you, and then the violin just takes over completely. It's a really nice passing of roles.
Bad dreams comforted by warm arms that held you so close. So close. Will you regret everything that you said, or will you hold it close to your heart?
They're really taking their time with the development of this song.
I will be waiting. I'll just keep waiting.
Some of our other longer tracks, we would have begun to reach a B section by now.
Hold on.
So the piano took the vocal melody here, and this is probably going to give us our final 2 minutes of instrumental outro. Rising intensity, particularly on the acoustic guitar.
Absence only made our hearts grow colder. I will be waiting. I'll just keep waiting for you.
There's a lot of time left.
Green takes the leaf, snow takes the sea.
What is that instrument?
It reminded me how awful things can be.
It sounds like a bowed string, but it's way lower than I think a violin can do.
To recall your tiny voice until I feel
There's no different personnel list for this track, so
I can hear.
I have no idea.
Counting down the numbers of the days. Was it the same amount of roses on your grave? Finally, I brought myself to sing these words. After the snow, we can find the sea. If you could be the trees, I would be your leaves. After she died, we decided to believe that her favorite color was probably green. On the day she died, in our hearts we did believe that her favorite color was probably green.
All right. Interesting way to wrap up this album. Primarily because, I mean, we have the instrument change. That's a cello, right? I don't know. It sounds like a cello to me. I can't believe that it isn't. I don't know. But it changes the feel, the vibe of everything. It brings a weight in it. It has the warmth of the violin without the brightness that it brings, particularly because of its higher range. And so it feels like it brings the whole song down. It grounds it in a way that we don't really feel anywhere else in the album. No matter how heavy or dreary or lethargic some of these tracks feel, there's always some levity to it from the piano, from the violin, and it just isn't here. There's no dichotomy, it is just a dreary ending. Aside from that, though, I think these two final songs, they feel like a Carissa's Wierd track. They feel like they belong on the album. Everything that I've talked about up until this point is present in both of these as well. Aside from the final track not having that contrast to it and sort of being only about the weight of it all. So, let's hit some lyrics, wrap up those thoughts, and I'll give some final ideas about the album as a whole, and then we can say our good. No, we'll just. I'll end the video. What was I going on about? All right, low budget slow motion soundtrack song for the Leaving Scene. It's about wondering when someone's coming back. How long will you be gone? How soon till you'll come home? Says, will you remember the feelings and colors, those bad dreams comforted by warm arms that held you so close? The refrain says absence only made our hearts grow colder. I'll just keep waiting for you, though. Almost an understanding that the distance that they've put between each other is making it easier to stay apart, but that there's still a small aspect within that says, tomorrow they'll be back. I'll just keep waiting, holding on to that little bit of hope. I think it's interesting. It runs in direct contrast to, I don't remember what it was. Maybe it was Silently Leaving the Room. Maybe it was So You Want to Be a Superhero. It was one of the earlier tracks that said that distance makes love grow stronger, or something along those lines. And so he kept himself at bay, hoping that it made the other person want to come back to him. This is an acknowledgement that the opposite is true. There is one interesting verse in here, though. It says, will you regret everything that you said, or will you hold it close to your heart? If someone wants to elaborate on that, I'm all ears. It's followed up because I'll be waiting. I'll just keep waiting for you. I don't get it. Unless what they said was positive and they regret. It says, do you regret saying those nice things to me, or are you going to hold it, or is that your truth? You know, is that how you really felt? Because I'll keep waiting if that's how you, maybe that's what it is. Because when I think of regret, it's something that you wish you hadn't done. But that doesn't mean it was a negative action. You could have done something positive that you wish you hadn't. That might be what's going on there. Otherwise, though, this song is definitely about somebody just waiting. Waiting for someone to come back to them, someone who left once. And kind of owning up to the fact that they'll never stop waiting. The final track, March 19th, 1983, it was Probably Green. I find this to be an interesting song. The intro talks about the passage of time, how it reminds them that things can be awful. It says, trying to recall your tiny voice until the fever breaks, it's all that I can hear, counting down the number of the days. Was it the same amount of roses on your grave? Finally, I brought myself to sing these words. After the snow, you can finally see if you could be the trees, I would be your leaves. So, somebody has passed away, and they meant a lot to this person. That all makes a lot of sense to me. Then the outro says, after she died, we decided to believe that her favorite color was probably green. And I'm going to need some help with that. This is how the album ends. We have a slight variation on it. It says, on the day she died, in our hearts we did believe that her favorite color was probably green. My only interpretation of this is something that calls back to some of the earliest tracks on this album about the people who are depressed being the ones that people care the least about. The ones that tend to get swept off to the side. It is how I'm reading this that they didn't know what this person's favorite color is. The narrator says, if you could be the trees, I would be your leaves. If you were still here, I would do everything for you. But the truth is, when they were here, nobody knew much about them. They don't even know what their favorite color was. And so, after their death, they rewrote her history, deciding to believe, and then, in their hearts, actually believing that her favorite color was probably green. They've made up something about her, which is kind of disgusting as a narrative plot, which is why I'm like, maybe that's not what it is, because this album has very much been about not that. But it does tie into a lot of the ideas that we saw at the beginning of people who have suicidal thoughts usually aren't cared about much by their friends and family. They're not listened to, they're not taken seriously. And that could be a way of presenting it here at the end. I'm curious how other people feel about that. This is the big ending to the album. It feels like it should wrap things up, and it just kind of leans into a lot of the negative aspects that we explored at the beginning of the album. Now, there is something peculiar I haven't really talked much about. It just dawned on me now. I was thinking how few tracks we saw with Jen on vocals. At the beginning, I tried to figure out what the purpose was of the dual vocalists, and I guessed that it was just their style, that both vocalists sang and harmonized. And that wasn't true. We ended up hearing a lot of songs with either Jen or Matt on vocals. Yeah. Songs would utilize one or the other in a way that I've kind of come to have a guess, a hypothesis that the songs have characters to them. If we listen to the 3 or 4 tracks that feature Jen, we might see a perspective of a specific character, whereas if we look at the ones with Matt, they would be a different character. It's possible at the beginning they were singing together, though they do separate at a point in there, and it could be a divergence of ideas. I know they were both on the same general theme, but it could be that these two characters are both dealing with similar issues. I don't know, because I'm still not entirely sure that this is a concept album, but there are points where there's some continuity, and I couldn't find any patterns to who would sing what parts or why. The lyrics seem to have fit either one of the vocalists. So I'm trying to find some reasoning to my lack of patterns that I've found. If anyone has insight into that, let me know. Maybe you have your own thoughts on it. But yeah, it just dawned on me. I was like, at the beginning, I figured it was just their thing, but it isn't. Separate songs and separate vocalists. That's got to mean something, right? And just as a quick little aside, when I look at the lyrics on Genius, I also head into the Genius comments to see if there's any additional context in there. Usually there's very little comments. It's not a very popular social media page. It is, after all, a lyrics website. But I did see a lot of people talk about how this is the most powerful music they've ever listened to. Many comments about I want to cry, or I've cried multiple times to this album, stuff like that. A lot of people saying that it's the best thing, completely unparalleled to anything else. I wonder what fans of this album feel towards The Glow Part 2 and vice versa. Because to me, as an outsider of both of these albums, coming to them way after they hit their peak and way after I think I would find any sort of emotional connection with them, they're both extremely similar to me, and I think that fans of one would really love the other. And I also think that they would no longer find that one, the album that they know about is unparalleled. I think they would really enjoy both of them on the same level. Anyways, that wraps up my thoughts on Carissa's Wierd, songs about leaving. It's definitely about that. Every song is about leaving on one way or another. What did you think of this album? Was there anything that stood out to you? Anything you'd like to add on to what I said or correct me on? Maybe just give me your own thoughts, perspectives, or opinions on. I know I asked a lot of questions during this reaction as well. If you have any answers to those or your own opinions and insights, let me know down in the comment section. Above that, in the description box, you'll find a link to Linktree. It takes you to this menu right here. You can find a link to my music, ways to support the channel, a link to the Discord server, and so much more. Above that, if you could, like, subscribe, and ring the bell. I greatly appreciate all three of those. That wraps it up for today, but I won't be back tomorrow morning. If you usually drop by the channel at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time for the live stream, don't do that tomorrow. I mean, you can still drop by the channel, there just won't be a live stream. It is Easter Sunday. I'll be taking the day off. But Monday we'll be back with next week's theme at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, 9 p.m. UTC as usual. Until next time, remember to be critical, not cynical, of the music you listen to, and have a fantastic morning, afternoon, or evening whenever you choose to watch my videos.